Everyone, I'd like to call to order our September 29th, 2022 school committee meeting at 7 o'clock. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. We have posted our consent agenda as well as our minutes from the September 15th, 2022 meeting, and as typical, the oath to bills and payroll. I'd like to accept the motion to accept those, please.
Motion to accept minutes from the September 15th meeting, scheduled together, and vote to build the payroll.
Perfect. Motion made by Ms. Patel. Second by Mr. Austin. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None? All right. As is typical, this is our first opportunity for interested citizens. Don't see any citizens in the room. I don't see anyone at home. So we will get started with our recognition. I'd like to invite John Feltus, our student representative, to give us a report this week.
Hello, my name is John Feltus. I am the student representative for Littleton Schools, and I have some updates to give about the schools. Schcmte had their first and second grade back to school night on Thursday. Families were given an overview of the day of the life of a first grader and a second grade student at Schcmte. Schcmte's book fair will be held next week. Families are invited to attend the book fair night on Monday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. K through 2 students will also have an opportunity to shop at the book fair during the library in the next week. Russell Street had their back to school night last Thursday. It was extremely well attended and lots of positive feedback was shared at the end of the night. 5th grade band starts this week. Flutes, clarinets, and saxophones meet on Mondays. Trumpets, trombones, and percussion meet Tuesdays. The middle school held their first roadshow event at Pondside, and it was a great success. Families were able to meet with teachers and administration without having to worry about childcare or spend a long time at the school in the evening. They are planning on holding another event in a different area of town, and they will send out more information when more things are confirmed. The 6th grade kids night out is scheduled Friday, October 14th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And the high school, there's a college planning night tonight, starting at 6:30. Parent teacher conferences are the 6th of October. Term 1 progress reports are going to come out in Aspen on the 12th. The homecoming game is going to be on the 21st, and the homecoming dance is going to be on the 22nd. And college visits have begun. Approximately a dozen college reps will visit LHS each week throughout the next month.
Thank you very much, John. Superintendent Clenchey.
Sure. We're happy to announce our district connections evening for families. So we had one last spring. We were so pleased with the results. Families gave us certainly a high five for covering topics that they truly need to learn more about. It's scheduled for October 26th, 5:30 to 7 o'clock at middle school. We approached Park and Rec, and they're offering free babysitting for that evening as well. So looking forward to the event. Last night we had a vax clinic. We had around 120 people get vaccinated. We were also giving flu shots as well. And we have 4 more clinics planned. We have one for October 27th, November 1st, November 15th, and November 29th. So we're in full swing.
Great. Will the flu vaccination be offered at all the clinics?
Yep.
So it's full.
You can go there and get 2 vaccinations if you so choose.
And the connections information for October 26th, is that information already out? I've just missed it,
No,
or it's coming out?
No, it'll be coming out. We don't send it out too early,
Okay,
so we'll send it out most likely next week.
great. Same topics as last year, or new topics, or?
We're actually, there'll be one that's the same, but we're looking for new ideas, and Mrs. Steele has been talking to staff. They're excited about coming out again and doing a presentation. So we're looking at things that we didn't cover last year that are important,
Mhm.
and we're certainly open to suggestions as well. I want to make sure this evening is meaningful and meets the needs of our family. That's why we're doing it.
You all set?
Did you have anything to add to that? Mrs.
No,
Steele?
A lot of the presentation, the workshops from last year's will be repeated, because many of them were offered only at one time. And so some of the feedback we received was that families wanted, there were two offered at the same time, they wanted to attend both. And so several of the topics will be repeated and new ones will be added in.
Sure.
So there will be a couple of new options for people to see.
And everyone's a year older, so like what might not have been applicable last year is applicable this year, so
True. And
makes
I'd
sense,
also,
makes sense to me.
excuse me, I'd also like to thank Principal Everhart for venturing out to Ponside, and I think it's a great opportunity to meet parents that live in the Ponside community and just sit down and have a coffee with them. So hoping the high school follows this lead and we venture out to the Boxwoods area as well.
All right, we will get underway with our presentations portion of the meeting. Running slightly ahead. Up first, Mrs. Steele, the Director of Student Learning, will present a summary of the MAP growth testing results from the 2021-2022 school year. Take it away.
Thank you. That's exactly what we'll do this evening, so we'll just jump right into it. All right. So this evening's presentation will cover three main areas. Just quickly at the beginning, we'll go over some important reminders about MAP growth, just so we're all on the same page. Then we will dive into the actual data and what it says. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of key takeaways from what we see from the data. So with that being said, we can jump ahead one more. Thanks, Steve. Perfect. Okay, so a couple of important reminders about MAP growth. So we need to remember that when we look at any piece of data, it is a piece of data. It is a piece of the bigger puzzle, the bigger picture of the student. So when we talk about this data, we just need to remember that there is a lot more to all of our students than just the information that we're going to see tonight. Also, another important reminder is that MAP growth assessments are adaptive. So what that means is that they're not standardized, such as MCAS, where every single student receives the exact same question in the exact same order. An adaptive assessment means that it's adapting to the student's responses from the previous questions. So what happens a lot of times with the MAP growth assessments is that they start with grade level or sometimes difficult questions, and then we'll adapt to where the students are. So the more the student is getting correct, then the harder the question will become. And if the student is getting a couple incorrect in a row, it will adapt to try and find where that student level actually is. And the goal is to find out where they're currently achieving, but also what they're ready to learn next. So we know a way forward. With the MAP growth, we assess 3 times a year. Again, unlike MCAS, which is once a year, we do this assessment 3 times a year, one time in the fall to get that baseline for the beginning of the year, one time in the middle of the year in the winter, and then in the spring as a wrap up to see the growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. A fourth reminder is that it does provide real-time data on current achievement. And so the key here is that real-time data. So as the teacher, they can go in and directly see every single student as soon as the student has completed the assessment. And so we're able to go in and directly see where the students are at and what they are ready to learn next, and maybe what we need to go about and reteach to them. And then lastly, a final reminder is that the MAP growth assessments provide real-time data on what the students are ready to learn next. So 4 and 5 are tied together with where they are and where they're ready to go. So we can jump right into the data. So we'll look school by school at first, and then we'll actually take a look at the data as a whole, because it is kind of looking at the data in 2 different ways. So the data this year, we brought together 3 years on this chart. So you will see the far left column is telling us the graded subject area, and the far right column is actually telling us the national norm. So any student that takes that growth, that becomes that normative data that we're able to compare. So typical second grader where they're at, typical third grader where they're at. Those in between columns are the past 3 years. So if we go back to fall of 2019, so it was the 2019-2020 school year, it started off as a typical year. We did MAP growth, And then, as we all know, March came and COVID hit and schools were closed. We did not do math group assessments because at that time there was not a way for us to do them remotely. We weren't there yet, and neither was NWEA. So if we move forward, we don't see any growth from that year because we don't have that springtime assessment, right? If we move forward 1 year, we have the 2020 to 2021 school year. Now, just to remind ourselves, this was a school year that was a mix of hybrid and remote. So some of our students that returned to the building, they hadn't been in a classroom in 3 months, right, of school plus summer. So just to kind of keep that piece of information in mind. And then some of our students still were not in school at all during that school year, right? So they were accessing all of the curriculum, all of the lessons remotely in a remote manner. In the spring of 2021 is when students, we had that full return to school, right? When we stopped doing the hybrid, we all came back, but with the exception of classrooms that were fully remote, predetermined for the full year. So we still have students who are learning from home and they were able to do the math group assessment from home. NWA had provided that option to us. And then it brings us to this past year, the 21-22 school year. And in that, we were all back to in-person. There was no option for that remote learning. We were in a time where we had the mask mandate for majority of the year. And because of the situation that we were still in, there were longer periods of absences. So just something to keep in mind when we're looking at data, that we're looking at the past 3 years that were unique. Each one in itself was unique for tied to the pandemic. So there are, when you're looking at this chart and for the next couple of slides, when we're looking at the school data, we're going back 3 years. But it's important to remember that each single one of these years represents a different cohort of students. So we're looking at grade 2, 3 separate cohorts of grade 2 students. So when we're looking at this data, we don't actually expect for each cohort to score better than the year before, right? So our expectation is that we're within the same ballpark of grit scores from year to year. And our expectation is that we see growth within the cohort from year to year. So looking at, and we see some dips in the numbers, they're not dips that we are majorly concerned with. They're not a large enough dip in numbers to be that concerned. And remember that we're looking at apples and oranges here. So it's hard to make that direct comparison. We will be able to do that in a chart later in the slides. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll go on to Russell Street. Again, we're looking at this data for Russell Street the past 3 years, the 3-year review, different cohorts again. But if we look at our 2 main ideas of, are we within the same ballpark and are we showing growth within each cohort? And we can say yes to both of those items as you look down the grade levels, but then also across the cohorts. What's also interesting about the data that you see here is that the 21-22 scores are almost all increased from the 2021 scores. An indication we're back in person, students are accessing more on a daily basis the direct lessons and having face-to-face time with just more consistent learning potentially. But it's important to remember that the comparison that we just made is 2 different cohorts. So keep that in mind. And so each cohort brings its own unique set of skills. And then we go on to the middle school. Again, we are within a reasonable range, within the same ballpark of previous years, and we're demonstrating growth each year. What you might start to notice is that there's decrease in reading growth as we go up in years, because at a certain point we transition from learning to read to reading to learn. Right, so there's less of that emphasis on the process of reading as opposed to using reading as a vehicle to learn content and material. And in the other is when you look at the national norm, we also see that the expected growth for every year actually decreases in the amount that's expected. So what we're seeing in our scores is typical with regards to the national norm, with regards to kind of how we're growing. But also important to note that we are consistently for all of our grade levels above the national norm that they expect typical per grade level. And then lastly, we have the high school. So for high school, we do just grade 9 reading. You might remember a couple of years ago, last year, I believe it was, we had, or 2 years ago, we had done the reading in grade 10 and 11. And while the data can be informative, it wasn't as informative as we were hoping it to be. And the teachers are able to find the data that they're looking for with their own assessments within the class and their own writing and reading that happens in their classroom. But we want to stick out for a few more years with the grade 9 reading. And so it's going to be a discussion moving forward as to, how we're going to continue to evaluate. Do we want to continue it at grade 9? There's a variety of reasons for this. So we can see in grade 9, like the other grades, we're well above the national norm. You will see we have shown a lack of growth, but it's not much. It's within a point or less than a point. Again, that's not enough to indicate any concern that we would be hypersensitive to these students. But they start out in the fall, they're new, it's a new school, new building, right? By the time the spring rolls around, they have done several, they've gone through midterms, they've gone through finals, potentially they've gone through various writing projects and assignments. And so they're getting to a point, they've also gone through math growth assessments several times over. And so they're getting to a point where they also are reaching towards the top of where they can achieve on math growth. And so occasionally they're actually seeing the same questions again. And I think we've all gone through that when you're going through something, you're like, I've already seen this before, I've got it before, right? So you might go through it a little bit quicker than you intend to or want to, which could be reason for that slightly negative growth. But again, it's not within anything that we would be of concern. What's nice, and I spoke with one of our grade 9 teachers this week, is that she is able to go in and kind of see student by student where those students are, right? And by the springtime, they know their students really well. So they're able to say, oh, that student, it was a mishap. They were reading too fast. Or she's able to then realize like, oh, that's a point of interest, and then be able to follow through with either, meeting up for incorporating something into the lesson or having a conversation with that student. So that was school by school. The next slide, which I think can be a little overwhelming, but comparatively, it allows you to do some different comparisons that we weren't able to do previously. So we're looking at a very similar setup, right, of 3 years going across. And so if you go straight across the grade 2, directly across from year to year, you're seeing the same data that you saw a couple of slides ago. What's interesting about this table is that you're allowed to follow the same grade group for 3 years now. So you have to go over one, down one, and it's the same group of students. I tried to color coordinate it. So it might be a little tricky, but there's steps down. Yeah, exactly. So let's go through the grade level 2 across the board here. So in 1920, students that were in grade 2, right, they had a 190.8 in reading on the RIT score and a 193.1 for a RIT score in math. Again, there was no spring, so we don't know growth during that year. However, if we go over and down one, we're following the green box. Those are the same groups, the same cohort of students in 3rd grade. So they went from in the fall of 2019 to having a 190.8 to the fall of 2020 being at a 198.5. So we had growth during the 1920 school year, right? We could say there's at least 8.5 growth. Where did they exactly land in the spring? We don't know, but we know that there was growth. And then we go directly over and we can see, okay, they ended their 3rd grade year at a 207.9. So we see that good growth during that 3rd grade year for them. If we follow them to where they were last year in grade 4, again, step over one down, so we're still in the darker green olive box. They ended 3rd grade on average at the 207.9. They started grade 4 in reading at a 209.5, which is great, right? Not only did they show growth during grade 3, but they actually had some summer growth, so some summer reading happening. And they started at a 209.5 in grade 4, ending at a 214.9. So when we look at the grade 5, when we're looking at this year, those students will be in grade 5. So we're going to hope that they're starting on average right around that 214. A couple points below would be totally typical and not abnormal. A couple points above would be fantastic and great, and they're showing growth year round is what that would be.
Would you mind if I ask you just a quick question?
Sure.
The timing of the test. So
Mhm.
it's not like they take the test on the last day of school and then they show up, they take the test on the first day of school.
Right.
And whatever they did over the summer is the difference.
Exactly.
The test is like where in the spring and then where in the fall? Because
Yeah.
there's learning that takes place after the test and then before the test takes place. And that's attributed to this as well.
Exactly. Yes, for sure. So typically the month of October is what
Okay.
we're trying to do for the sake of ease. So it's the month of October. So we're at least 4 to 6 weeks
Yep.
into the school year.
Okay.
And then in between the test sessions, we have to have at least 8 weeks of instruction. And so then that brings us to the winter test session being about January, February.
Yeah.
And then again, another 8 weeks at least, sometimes 9, to bring us to that spring, which typically is in May.
May, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is some learning afterwards and before. I will say that there is a little bit of caveat, right? Especially in the younger grades, it's not like they're starting content necessarily from the curriculum on day 1 of school, because they're going through the routines and setting all that structure up. But certainly by the time that they take that, they're in that fall window, they certainly have had lessons within the content.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So that chart is for you to be able to see, not only going across and seeing average year to year, but then following some cohorts and going straight down and being able to see from past the past years how they have done compared to themselves. So the vast majority, you can see that they're demonstrating growth year upon year, which is exactly what we want to see. And even during the pandemic, they're demonstrating growth. Our students are learning. They're accessing the information and material, and they are learning. The next slide doesn't have, we went to words, not numbers on this slide. So if we're looking at the top chart, we're looking at the reading. What's unique and nice about math growth is that we can see as a cohort on average where their strengths lie, and then where there's areas for improvement. And so you can see going straight across where each grade level is at, and you'll see that it really varies for reading and math where their strengths lie. Every cohort is a unique cohort with a different skill set. So it is not atypical for it to kind of be varied and for you to see, oh, it's only 1, and then the next year it jumps to a different need. What sticks out is that in the reading, for the areas of improvement, you'll see from grades 4 straight through to 9, they all share a common area of improvement. And that area of improvement is the literary text key ideas and details. I had several conversations with some of our ELA and our reading teachers this week, just kind of thinking through this of, it's atypical for us. We haven't seen this in the past.
Can you just, I think I know what it means, but can you explain for all of us in the community what that means to just the parents?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about literary text key ideas and details, it's reading a story or reading a chapter and then talking about the main idea, right? What's the big picture that you just got from that story? But then also the smaller detail that you have to read closely for, right? Of how was the reaction of that person based on the situation, right? So it's kind of, it's a blend of finding the details, but also knowing the big picture of what it's about.
In the math test, it's multiple choice. They're picking which of these best.
Yes.
Which of these best. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's all sorts of question types on that,
Mhm.
but for this, most of them are multiple choice, as you're indicating. So in conversations and thinking this through with some of our ELA and our reading teachers, it's interesting because this is like their jam, right? Their bread and butter. It's what they do. And so it is a little bit surprising However, if we take a step back and consider the environment that we've been in for 2 years, it's not actually all that surprising. So during the pandemic, right, we had varied learning. It wasn't consistent face-to-face learning, and it wasn't able to have spontaneous discussions, which is what happens a lot of times when you're reading a book, right? It might be that they're doing book studies in class, and so there's a variety of books happening. And in our younger levels, who they choose, they're really excited about going to the library, they choose their own book, and they go home and read it. And so there's conversations of, hey, how's that book going, right? And having those conversations kind of spontaneously, as well as structured in the classroom. Now, when you're having those conversations, the educators kind of facilitating the conversation, right? Broad question, and then it goes off with the flow of how people are responding. In remote and hybrid, it was harder, quite frankly. It was harder to have those natural, spontaneous conversations when people weren't on screens. You didn't know if they were there, or maybe they were there, but it's hard. It's hard to talk through the screen. It was hard to get used to that environment. And so there's that piece of the puzzle there. Whereas, vocabulary acquisition and use was it didn't take as much spontaneous conversation, right? It was more, what's the word for this, right? Or who can define this? It's a little bit more straightforward than speaking about a book and the context and the ideas and the details.
So we have the national norms. I am interested about state norms, those exist, but we're seeing that this is a consistent area of concern. Do we have like sub-scores, or like, there's always room to improve. This is the lowest of our groups, but it's not troubling, or is this the numbers more?
It's not,
Not troubling. It's not, I mean, there's alarming is the other word I come up with, and that's not more than neither
word.
troubling. Hair raising and.
So we can it's none of those. So it actually, and it's tricky. So when we look at this, we're pulling out, because we can look at this for every single student.
Sure.
Right? So it just happens that majority of students, this is an area of need for those students, and just happens that this year, this is what we're seeing. And we do think in reflecting on it myself and having conversations with our reading and ELA teachers, this can be a direct impact of kind of what we've seen the past year, couple of years. And so it's not a concerning level. Can we see sub-scores? Absolutely. We can go down to individual students and see where students are at. And so I think as the educator and the classroom teacher, they're going to go in and see, because we might actually have a class with a different makeup this year where a fifth grade teacher might say, actually, that's not my group's area of improvement.
Another way of asking the question, is an area of absolute concern or relative to their other scores that's the most concerning, but not absolutely concerned? Is that a better way to ask it?
Concern.
Relative
Yes,
concern.
I will
That's
take you
funny.
on.
Okay.
I will meet you on that one. Yeah,
Okay,
I think a relative concern. And to me, when I'm looking at this, relative concern is that all of a sudden it's going across the board, right? Which is it has been atypical from what we have seen in the macro data historically. What is more historically, what we've seen is actually the math, where you see, okay, 2 years in a row, we struggled with measurement and data, but then it switches, right? So that is kind of what jumped out and was like, ooh, let's really pause on this one and have a conversation about it. But every single teacher that I spoke to, right, it was one of these like, that's really interesting, right? Let's dig into it a little bit. It's relative concern at the moment. I do not think it is going to be an ongoing area of concern.
I know we'll get to takeaways in a second, but is this an opportunity for you as a curriculum leader and for the teams to put your heads together, do PD about this and kind of address it together? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So the benefit, right, as much as it's like, ooh, this is interesting, it's actually a benefit because it hones in on what we need to collaboratively work on. And it allows us to do that in a more collaborative way, as opposed to kind of in our own isolation of our grade level.
At the grade level and more vertically? Gotcha.
Exactly.
Definitely an anomaly. I've never seen it before.
Makes sense.
I've looked at many of these over my career. I've used this exam since 1988. It's strange. And what's going to be really interesting is with our first administration of NWA this year, what is it going to show us? It's going to show us something different, or so it's kind of intriguing.
And I think part of it too is accessibility, right? If you were learning remotely, for an entire year, how often should you go to the school to pick up a new book? How often should you go to the library to take out new books? You know, how often can Amazon drop off books at your house? All sorts of things, right? With regards to that. As a district, we made it as accessible as we possibly could. But that's another piece of that puzzle there. So in the grand scheme of things, I think it draws our attention to it as it should. We've identified it. We now know we can collaboratively work together to make sure that that is not an ongoing area of concern. And I feel 100% confident in saying that it will not be an ongoing area of concern.
Can I just ask, do the special ed students take this as well? And is that cohort separated from this, or do you guys analyze that at all to see what their progress is within their curriculum?
Yes, so they everyone takes SNAP growth. It's universally done assessment. We do not identify within the MAP growth system. We do not identify students who are high needs or anything of that sort. Like MCAS does, right? So on MCAS, we can draw out and hone in on that specific subgroup of data. Can we do that with MAP growth? Yes, we don't, because the purpose of MAP growth is really to be that just in time support. And so as a classroom teacher, I can go in and I know my students, right? I know my students who have IEPs, I know my students who have 504s, I know my students who are Untitled and who are struggling in particular areas. And so they are able to go in and look at, I mean, we're looking at hundreds of students.
Right.
They're going in and looking at 25 or less, ideally, pending grade level. For the school obviously looks at more. They have all the students in the grade level in our high school too. But they're able to hone in on the specific groups. And so they can actually create, when they're looking at the data, they can pull up certain students and group them together to kind of see if they want to look at a subgroup like that. They're able to do that.
Yeah, and so are they tracking them to make sure that there is improvement from fall to spring within those cohorts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're ensuring that all students are making progress.
Right.
Okay. So as we move on, so the first part of the data, we looked at the RIT score, right? Because the way MAP growth, everyone is on that same scale. Now we look at the next few slides. This is the achievement as opposed to that RIT score that we were looking at, right? So, and Lynn and I had a conversation about this week. We wish we could change the colors a little bit because it kind of can be misleading on the colors that are here. So with looking at the top of their reading, the red, for that percentile, it's low. So it's below 21 in the 21%. The orange is low average. So they're 21 to 40. Yellow is actually average.
Doesn't mean caution.
It did not mean caution,
But
which
it
is
means
part
50th percentile.
it 41 and above. So anyone that is any yellow to the right, so yellow, green, and blue on grade level or above, looking good, no concerns. So when we actually look at this and we see, right, 18%, they're average, they're on grade level. That's what we expect and want to see. 23% are actually above grade level, and then 44% are even higher than that. So when we look at this, achievement-wise, our students are achieving really well on MAP growth assessments. And so just to give an idea of numbers too, right? So 85% are in that yellow to blue, and that equates to 100 students for grade 2 in the reading. So then when we look at the orange and red, where those are our low average students and our lower students, right, that we're gonna really hone in on and see what skills do we need to maybe backfill or what skills do we need to improve to be able to move forward. So that is actually 19 students altogether. So if we look at math, again, achieving very high with regards to where we're at. I'll say it again, yellow, green, and blue are good. That's what we want to see. So it's the orange and red that we're able to really hone in on. And this is
So is that the functional equivalent of kind of meets the standard or proficient?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, exactly. And yeah,
No, finish your statement.
I was just gonna say, this report, it's in beta. I hope they keep it, to be perfectly honest. It's actually a really neat report from a school and district point, because I can click on the 13% and find out who are those students. And then I can go in more specifically and find out, okay, where are we with them, right? What are the skills that we need to be working on? So you're seeing it as stagnant. It actually is an interactive and helpful report for us.
This is super interesting. I have sort of a two-part question. One is, has this been typical across the years, this sort of red to blue spread that we're seeing right now? And I think, typically you gravitate towards the red and orange and supporting them. And I know that that's obviously going to be a priority. What would you say is the priority for supporting the 44% blue, which can also be on the other end of it, right? Because they're above, and to keep them engaged and challenged.
Exactly. So we definitely, I think our first, right, is those orange and red. We go straight. What supports do we need for those students? How can we do it? How are we going to manage that? And those supports are kind of the first ones that come up. You're totally right with regards to the 44 that are in that blue also need to be pushed and challenged, right? And so also another reason why we're sticking with our professional development on universal design for learning, because that allows us to push every single student. It meets every single student where they are, and then encourages them to push forward academically. I was actually just in Diane Tricana, she's our grade 6 ELA classroom today, and she, based on yesterday's PD, we actually had a conversation, and she was like, the timing of it was perfect, because they're about to begin a class read. They do one class read as a whole grade in grade 6, and then she lets them split up and they do book studies. And so she was saying with that class read, they're about to start it, and she knows that she has some students in that class, it's a 3-week unit, that will finish the book in 3 days and be done. They're part of our 44%, right? They're part of that blue. And so then we have other students who are going to take the full 3 weeks and are going to need the scaffolded supports to get through the book, right? So she was saying that the support that we need for those scaffolded, we have, right? It's being able to push that upper level. And so the UDL PD that we had yesterday, she was kind of eye-opening in the sense of now she has ideas of how to go back to the standards and relook at what did they work on in previous grades, and how can she incorporate those cohesively to ensure that these students are pushing themselves to ensure that they're meeting the grade 6 standards.
Yeah.
So it's everything kind of ties together, right? But that is why we're really ensuring that we're sticking with that UDL and pushing that initiative forward, because it has been a way for us to identify where students are at individually and how we can bring that forward.
Yeah. And is this pretty typical, you think you've seen?
Thank you for rebringing.
Yeah.
Yes, so it is. This is a new report, so it is. It's easy to visually see it this way. So we've not visually seen it this way before. However, the numbers do correspond with what we have seen historically.
Okay.
I'm hoping they keep it because of this is an easy way for us to kind of see it and for you to view it and say, oh yeah, right. Our student, a lot of our students are grade level and above, and our students that are not, we're certainly, we know who they are, and we're providing that.
Can I,
Just ask go ahead.
please go ahead.
So I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Obviously, we want to see the kids achieve average or above, which is great. So, but when I see almost half the student body is achieving above their grade level, it makes me think kind of like the mental health and the challenges that the kids are having. Does that mean our curriculum is teaching above their grade level? That they necessarily, I mean, it's great that we're challenging them. I'm not saying I don't want to challenge them,
Yeah.
but with everything the kids have on their plate, do we want them to be achieving that high, that many students to be achieving that high when that's not necessarily what they're expected to be achieving within their grade level?
I love your question because I think it brings up a good point of that. Where do we lie with that academic pressure along with what we've seen, right? So I'm hoping that one of the takeaways here from seeing this map growth data is that our students are vast majority are doing well academically. They're growing academically. They're assessing their curriculum academically. What's important though is that this is in comparison to the national norm data. And so there isn't a state, which I So one of you said, the state, I totally agree. I wish we could have that.
That would be great, yeah.
But we don't have that. It would be super interesting also to see just because it's a mess.
Can we not just share our data with other districts, community, like surrounding towns to just do it ourselves?
There are not that many districts in Massachusetts that use this assessment.
Oh, it's not standard across.
No,
Guess what other districts do?
well, there are hundreds of thousands of districts across North America.
No, I'm just, what are our surrounding peers? How are they
I'm not even sure.
making assessments?
In Massachusetts.
Yeah, so we use this as an elective, but an additional to maintain that we are able to provide support in the moment instead of MCAS, which is a year late, and then it's kind of MCAS is just in case. This is the just in time. And so in addition to this, we also use other investments like Ames Web, right? For more that's more standardized across more districts. Other districts will, like Lynn was saying, they'll use other like Renaissance or STAR, and they use that in the capacity somewhat the way that we use MAP, but more in the way that we use Ames Web with regards to early literacy screener to ensure that the students are able to kind of get those foundational skills. So we're not able to kind of compare statewide because we don't have, and even our like immediate neighbors are not using MapGrow. So that's why we do have to rely on that national norm data, which does make it this.
It makes it tricky because then you don't even know who you're necessarily comparing them to. We just know who we're not comparing them to, which is a lot of our local communities.
It gives us an idea nationally how our students are doing, which is important.
Right.
But we use this test because it's adaptive and it gives us real-time data to focus in on our strengths and the challenges that students may have. It's interesting because probably 10 years ago or so, when they're redesigning standardized tests throughout the United States, there was a camp of standardized tests and there was a camp of adaptive tests. And it was kind of interesting to see how it all fell out in the end. Adaptive exams are used more in central to western United States, and the eastern states stuck with standardized tests.
Yeah.
For some reason.
I mean, the data is awesome. I mean, I think it's so,
Yes.
it seems so interesting to look at.
But I also think it's important for us to acknowledge this, right? Because we do hold ourselves to high expectations, as we should, and we will continue to do so. So, right, so our goal is to always maintain this good looking data.
Yeah.
But it comes with the knowledge of knowing that it's a national comparison. So we are comparing ourselves to other districts who are totally unlike us.
Right.
But not necessarily any different when we do our MCAS on a smaller scale, right? Because when we're comparing ourselves to the state data, there's a lot of districts in Massachusetts that are very different and varied from us too. So it's a caveat to the data.
Yeah.
I was just saying, research tells us too that Massachusetts is a higher achieving state than many other states too. So we would expect to see our data higher than the national norm.
Right.
Just like Beth said, there's many districts where we would expect we're a high achieving state, but we're also a high achieving district relative to other districts within the common.
Since we're digging in, can I ask one question or to follow up on what Stacey said earlier about special ed students? I understand we don't do it holistically, like we do with MCAS, but I do think, especially if the numbers are, 11%, 13% in the what do we call that, peach and red categories, it might be useful for us to look and see if there's a preponderance of students there in on high needs, 504s, IEPs. Just to, real time, just to see as a kind of a quality check for services. It might, I'm just saying, not calling for you to, I just think it might be useful for us just to do that, just to see.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I can see that we have.
Oh, good.
And we have looked at, individual students and there are students that we've been thrilled because we also like to look at their growth percentile. So there are some students on IEP that have a 98% growth percentile, which means that they're incredibly responsive to the interventions that we're providing, which is exceptional. But then there's also, we have to look at capacity and potential too. So this is very, very, I like to see this data because this is also within the range of not every student that is on an IEP, we're expecting to see at lower achieving. There are students that are on an IEP because they have an SLP in math, but they may be off the charts with reading and ELA. So we can't necessarily use that as a measure, but being able to drill down to the individual student, we really want to be looking for our individual students who are on IEP. We want to be looking at their growth percentile to see if we're able to really start to close that gap specific to where their disabilities impact them in the first.
And is this data ever shared? I mean, obviously, with the students that you're specifically tracking, if you're seeing some deficiencies in them, is this data or growth shared with the parents from the first time they take the test to, you know, in the fall, they were going to get the scores, these are the improvements that they've made, the parents are getting that information to kind of see that you guys are.
Yeah, so it can be brought up at SFTs, also with regards to kind of the status checks as to where the students are. We use it certainly for Title I in that program, which provides math support at Chamberlain and reading and math support at Russell Street. And that is used and then updated. And then at the end of every year, every family does get a yearly report as to their student with regards to how they did on all 3 testing windows and then their growth. Because as Lynn was saying, that student could be in the 90th percentile growth, they could still be part of that orange ribbon group, right? But we're proud of them for making these gains that they did make.
Right.
So it's, yeah. Perfect. So we can go on to the next slide that has the Russell Street information. Again, there's not any bar or grade level that is of concern in looking at this, and we're able to kind of dive in deeper and look at the numbers that are there. And so we have the middle school after that. And then lastly, the high school grade 9 of the reading. So then in general, you might have several takeaways, but 3 that I just would like to highlight is that 1, our students are continuing to learn and they're demonstrating growth, right? And as Lynn indicated, sometimes it's not necessarily the achievement percentile that we're looking for or that we're looking at. We're really looking at the individual student, and that's something that map growth allows us to do, which is why we continue using it and we like it for that reason that we're not necessarily getting from other assessments. A second takeaway is that it allows us to really continue meeting students where they are. And hopefully the data demonstrates that, because we're able to dive into that data and see exactly where our students are and where they're headed next. And then also from our own data, but also NWEA recently came out with a report nationwide, just indicating that we are seeing signs of a rebound from the pandemic. It'll be interesting to see over the next few years if it continues to go up. Heard recently, we were in a webinar and someone compared it to a check mark. And where are you in the check mark? And I thought that was a really nice comparison, right? So we were at a certain spot, and then the pandemic hit. We went down, right? We went down our scores. Our data indicates that, and we're starting that forward trajectory back up. And so it'll just be interesting to watch over the next couple of years of kind of how fast we go, or how slow we go, and kind of where we're headed. But I feel confident in the direction that we are going. If you have other questions, I'm happy to.
Sure. So I think at some point we all just started asking questions, which thank you for dealing with us. But I'm sure we all have a couple more questions. Jen, do you have?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
It's all very clear. Thank you.
Brad?
I've asked most of my questions. I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
My comment is I'm just glad we're doing this. And I'm sure there's significant costs to the district and costs to staff time and administrative time to look at the data. But I'm glad we have it as families. I'm glad we have it as a district. So I think this is a good decision. If it ever comes up, do we want to keep doing it? I'm a whole yes. So and this is helpful.
Good. You know,
No question.
say sure. I have a couple. Go right ahead.
Okay. So what are these? Is this like 100 questions? Like what is the test? I'm sorry, I don't know ahead of time, but
No, that's
what
okay. So it used to be, they actually just changed it recently. It used to be that there were slightly different numbers based on the grade level that you were in. So it ranged from about 42 questions to like 53 questions. And they've changed it so it's less questions for all grade levels, but it's right around in that 40 number. It is intended to not take all day. But you know, some of our students they really want to get them right. It's an adaptive test comparison to a standardized test in difficult concept because you purposely get questions that are too hard, right? They're very challenging. And some of our students have immense persistence, and so they stay at it. So sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to finish. But it is intended to be we give 90 minutes, 2 hours, depending on the situation. So we want students to we want them to take it and to feel good about it and not have to, we don't want them to have to struggle through it and then be very frustrated.
Yeah. And is there any like achievement anxiety? Like, is this something that's talked about in class? If you have your math test, like make sure you're paying attention to it. It's kind of like, I feel like MCAS, when I was taking MCAS, it's like, gotta make sure you're paying attention for MCAS.
Yeah.
Or is this something that's just very passive? Like, guys, we're just gonna take this exam just to see how you're doing.
It's not totally passive, but it is definitely more passive than it is with regards to, we're test taking MCAS prepping. So it is let's try our best, but there is the explanation of we're doing this so that we know where we are to be able to move forward. There is no implication to report cards or anything of that. That information is definitely shared and clear. But as we all know, some students, struggle with that. So it's repeated those conversations are happening.
And I assume like students get their test results, or is it just they take it and they're on their way?
No, students are able to see their test results. Yeah.
Throughout time, it's become more organic. When we first started administering this exam in the district, we really had to spend some time with our high achievers because they'd never taken a test that they really struggled with. And this test is guaranteed to take them to the max. And so we really had to explain what adaptive testing was. And this is a natural part of the test.
Yeah.
But it took a while.
I think I read online that essentially you end up getting about 50% of the questions wrong. That's how much the test moves. That's sort of the goal.
Right.
You also, so just my two quick questions or sort of slight observations where I remember Principal Kane saying like our students are entering Shaker Lane less prepared than they have in years past. And just kind of want to point out that like second graders entered second grade with a score of 190 2 years ago. And then a year ago, they showed up 186. And then last year they showed up 184. So like proof is in the pudding that we do have a little bit of ground to make up because those kids were in first grade and kindergarten where they're trying to put those fundamental skills together. So that's a negative, but of course it's not a Littleton negative.
I was just saying.
Of course, yeah.
They've had remote
Principal Kane is
hybrid
right on that.
yeah, well,
Yeah, on that,
No,
where's the emphasis?
yeah. But no, you're right, there is
just-
when we
It's
compare
just, I
that,
observed that.
absolutely. But I also think it's important, it's one piece of data, we gotta take a step back and what were those students living? What-
Sure, no,
what was
completely
the reality?
understand.
And then-
That's kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, I think in the presentation was a little bit of concern about the slowing down of achievement as it relates to like ninth grade reading and all that stuff. But if you look at the national average again, we'd like to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're pretty much achieving that ninth grade national average by fifth or sixth grade. So that's another point that I observed, which wasn't exactly shared. But I guess my questions are really about what do we actually do with the data? So you mentioned, which I think was very powerful, hey, 19 students in, I think we're looking at second grade or below. So this, let's say that's spread across 6 classrooms. So it's 3 per. Like, do we actually pull the files? Geez, are all of these kids getting inclusion or pull out, or do we need to reshuffle the groups, or like what level of degree do we shake things up based upon the data that we get?
So it depends on the level of data, right?
Mhm.
If there is major significant, we're able to change groups. Our math groupings can be dependent on this. Our Title I intervention support can be, altered if we see a student who has significant needs. And so it does depend on what that data looks like. the classroom teachers all look at it, but then they also have team meetings where they're then able to discuss, and we have the SST process in which they're able to go, take a student to in order to find, you know, all of a sudden, I expected more growth out of the student. I didn't see it.
Mhm.
What's going on? I think we also then, and I'm happy to pass over, because they, being in the building, are gonna know exactly. But I think also that it's one red flag, and then it makes us question more. It has us become curious about that student of what's going on, right? Are we seeing that in just this one subject area,
Mhm.
or are we seeing this across the board in multiple? What's going, you know, is something happening in the world for that student at that moment, right? So kind of, it allows us to become curious and that's kind of our entry point into that curiosity. Michelle, if you want to.
You know, I think it's, I wanted to raise my hand a bunch of times, so I'm just talking. I think the information that teachers get is really granular. So I remember, you know, hearing teachers, they get to the end when the kids are all done, and then they dive in there and they look, and teachers will say, I thought they had, you know, beginning capitalization and punctuation now, and my class doesn't, and another class, my class has got that perfectly well. So so then, you know, the classes get together, what are we gonna do for that? So it could be, I think the important thing really in general is that the train doesn't keep moving on. That's when the train pauses and says, hey, if we have some kids that fell off, we have to go back
Mhm.
and pick those kids up. And so the kids that have it are moving on, they're gonna do something else. And the kids that don't have it get to back up and get that practice of the teaching or whatever. So it isn't that the train keeps going and the kids keep falling off over here. We have those 3 times during the year where they stop and really figure it out. And if everything has gone along fine and there isn't anything to go back and review, then they don't need to. They know they're gonna do a regular, you know, we're gonna do our regular kind of review the way we would have done it before. But it really helps kind of in this cycle to make sure kids are working towards mastery and all the little skills along the way.
Okay.
And I was just gonna say, put a pin in that, because I'm gonna come to that when I do my presentation, and one of the diversified reading interventions. And that's what we have been focusing on the past few days. What do we do? And I have all that to do.
Great.
I think I just had a 2-minute timer. I got a 2-minute warning on my presentation on that. But I also think it's important to note that our grade level teams work really well and collaboratively together. And even the ones that they're self-contained, where they teach the same set of students across the board, when they meet and have these conversations, they're having conversations of, oh, I'm seeing a pocket in my group that's struggling with this. How do I move forward with that, support with that? And they can use the win time to be able to group students together to be able to, practice that too. So there's a lot of different strategies that are used at the classroom.
Sure. It's interesting that they share the national norm data with us, but did they share that as well with the strengths and areas of improvement? So no, they didn't. Okay.
That would be nice.
That would have been
Really
great.
nice.
And then I'm assuming that they didn't share the bar coding as well, because that would have been interesting to see if our district was like other districts where we had, where's our bell curve
Right.
as it relates to, you guys already asked that question.
No, that's just what she was thinking earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I agree. It would be really nice to see that.
And how long have we been doing the map testing?
For 11 years.
Okay. And we're sticking, I mean, I agree with Brad. I think like this tool is helpful, but do we ever evaluate other systems where we might be able to get Massachusetts data or data that's more closely tied to our peers so we can?
We do. I mean, I'm pretty critical of the assessments that we use in our district. And WA has earned their place in the market. They update their testing procedures. They're aligned with state standards, which vary from state to state. So they're a forerunner in testing. So we do take that litmus test quite often, because we want to make sure that if we're going to take the time to do an assessment, it's going to give us what we're looking for.
Draw your attention to one thing you said, that this invites curiosity. I think you've seen how it's done that for this committee, but I love that that's how y'all are using it as well. Hey, this raises questions. Let's ask questions. Let's dig in a little more about what's happening in students' lives and in classrooms. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's great.
All right. Next up, we'll have a review of the strategic plan. So we'll invite, don't particular order, Principal Kane, Principal Temple to review the strategic plans as noted. to standard one curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Schools will discuss school improvement plans specific to the goals for 22-23 school year, discuss major accomplishments. I'm just reading for the audience's benefit. Challenges and any suggested revisions or goals that should be taken into consideration as we review standard one as part of the process for creating updated strategic plans for the 23 through 28 planning period. You're up. Thank you.
Michelle was sneaky and she
She's
put
back.
her information on the slides after mine, so I'm gonna go first. So standard one is curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Some of our slides are up.
Yep.
Did you want to go to directly to 5 slides?
Three more slides,
There
maybe.
we go.
There we go.
As I said, the standard one is curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Next slide, please. So the goals in the Russell Street's school improvement plan were, in terms of those 3 areas, were implementation of standards-based pre-K to 12 curriculum that is aligned with the state frameworks and is well articulated vertically and horizontally, to develop and implement a 5-year curriculum review cycle, to use multiple forms of data, as we were just talking, to measure and evaluate student achievement, identify and implement effective instructional practices to support the academic achievement and social emotional skills of diverse learners. So those were the goals that were created to work on curriculum, assessment, and instruction. So our accomplishments at Russell Street, while working through standard one, are we did create and implement a standards-based report card. So that's in place now. The K-5 professional collaboration for vertical alignment has been ongoing, and thanks to Beth is very rigorous and ongoing as well. PD for math workshop model and extended writing tasks in reading, math, and science. That has PD that has taken place, and our kids have been successful due to it. Math curriculum review and implementation of new math curriculum, that's underway right now. I put ongoing, but it's really underway. And we have a significant amount of professional development scheduled for this year. In years past, we purchased and shared FOSS materials for science, for hands-on interactive science. The classroom teachers use rating rubrics, and that is implemented and continues now. Oddly enough, we had the addition of a kiln to support our fine arts program, and the kiln is very actively used by Mrs. Evans. Implementation of the one-to-one Chromebook program is another one of our accomplishments that we've talked about, and regular data provided by map testing 3 times a year, and Acadians, as Beth just talked about. So those were some of our accomplishments in our school improvement plan. And challenges, the common planning time for K-5, and I'm not saying this to be a negative, but the times that our schools get out at the end of the day in terms of K-5 make it so we overlap. If you want to have K-5 together, our free time overlaps only by about an hour. And so that has been, it's not a negative, it's not a criticism, it just becomes a little bit challenging when we're trying to work on the K-5 alignment. It's hard to get K-5 all together at the same time. So, Russell Street gets out earlier so we can get started. And then we kind of join together with Shaver Lane, and then Shaver Lane kind of finishes. And so we've tried to, in the professional development that we have so far created for this year, we've tried to kind of juggle those times a little. So, we get on maybe a little bit later and stay a little bit later so we can be together for a little bit longer. So again, it's a challenge, it's not insurmountable, but it's just a challenge. Implementing several new initiatives at the same time. So at Russell Street, kind of in reverse order, Lucy Pockets, we started for writing up 2 years ago, and teachers piloted it, and then more teachers are using it, and now it's become more regularly used, but it's still a new initiative. Foundations is another newer initiative, and then the Intermap is brand new that we just started this year. And that's in all of the classrooms across Shaker Lane and Russell Street. So, you know, teachers kind of feel that pressure of doing 3 sort of new things at the same time. And certainly the Intermap, while everybody is excited about it, there's a lot of professional development and a lot of work to be done, as there would be with anything brand new. So again, I'm not saying it as a negative, I'm just recognizing it as a challenge. The focus professional development time, obviously, we and you know, when we were trying to figure out when we were going to put in the professional development time, you know, there's ordinarily building time built in to work on other initiatives. And this year, for both of us at Shaker Lane and at Russell Street, in collaboration with Beth for the Intermap, we've given all of our time to focus on that this year. So again, it's just recognizing the challenge that other things that we have put other things aside to focus on that this year. As wonderful as map testing is, and I do agree that it's wonderful and it gives us the information, again, we recognize that a challenge that the time that it takes to do the testing. So 3 times a year, and you know, the first one is in October. So if you picture come to school in September, you're on a roll, you get going, you're just getting into new stuff, and then there's kind of a slow pause to do map testing. And then you kind of rev up again, and you get back into it, and then January rolls around and it's time to do it again. And it's very valuable, and it gives us great information. The time spent on it is, you know, the teachers will say, you know, we were just kind of getting into a role and then this is happening. But again, it's definitely the advantage, as we have just said in the previous presentation, is having the information in real time. You don't get too far away before you can back up. You're not saying to kids, oh, do you remember when we were doing that skill? We do remember because it wasn't that long ago. So it is easier to double back and make sure that those gaps get filled in. We have talked a lot last year and this year. I don't like my use of the word managing, although I couldn't think of a better word. We do have a range of learners, and we had talked about that before. And we feel like the range, you know, the teachers will say, I have a big range in my class. It's just a reality. Again, recognize it as a challenge. I'm pleased to see the use of a lot of stations and centers in the classrooms. It really is a meaningful way to make sure that kids can rotate around, get what they need. There might be a group on the computers, there might be a group sitting with the teachers, there might be a group, you know, with a learning assistant or doing something, you know, in a book or whatever, and to be able to go through the stations and make sure that everybody is getting what they need at that time. And again, the win time, the what I need time is very valuable at Russell Street, and we use that throughout all of our grades. And that's really to focus on what kids need and make sure they get that. And I did throw in the lack of schedule flexibility with shared UA staff. And again, I'm not complaining, I'm just identifying it as a challenge. We continue to have our Unified Arts staff shared between Shaker Lane and Russell Street, and it impacts our schedule, the ability for us to be flexible in our schedule. And so, in our band program as well, we share our band instructor with the high school. And so, although those programs are wonderful, all of our UAs are wonderful, but if we, you know, we can't have a certain UA at a certain day because they're at Shaker Lane. So that, again, I'm just bringing that up as a challenge that we don't have a lot of flexibility in the day when there's specific times that we know specific staff have to be in other places. I feel like I was complaining there and I'm really not.
That's okay.
No, it's good to hear that.
It came over fine. Don't worry about it. It's incredibly helpful.
No, we want to hear that. And so revisions and goals to consider as we move forward. I put the goals first. So we really want, and this ties right into what we were just talking about with math, to have a goal that all students will demonstrate individual growth in all tested subjects. We really want to focus on individual students and individual growth. So that kind of continues to be a goal for us to consider. And also the continuation of the incorporation of the UDL model for instruction. That is another way that we are managing, not a good word again, but the range of students is with that UDL model. It really is this, it's really interesting, and I know you would have probably been out in the classroom study. It's really interesting to see, you know, I think when we first started UDL, people were thinking, oh, this is another new thing, this is hard to do, I have to redo everything. And then slowly teachers are learning, I don't have to redo anything. I just do this a little bit of a different way, or I just offer this in a little different way. And it's really, it can be a small little fix that makes a big difference for lots of the kids. And they're really excited about coming up with, it's rarely a day goes past that a teacher doesn't stop and say, look at this thing that I came up with. And it's just a small little thing. In some instances, it's a small little thing, but the UDL model has been really wonderful. And so it's a goal in my mind to continue with that. Things to consider, certainly, we've talked about this. The mental health and anxiety in students, we've talked about that. It needs to be, in my mind, incorporated as a goal as we move forward. And I would say certainly at Russell Street, but also district-wide. And we've had lots of conversation about that. And the alignment of the curriculum, Beth and I have had a lot of conversations about this. And I think it's really important. I think over the years, teachers have gotten into the habit of doing add-ins and things like that, and picking things that they really liked, or, you know, this was the material they were supposed to use, but they really still like this lesson, and so they use that. And, you know, now I think Beth has given us kind of a clear path and a focus to move forward. And that we as principals know that we need to kind of push our staff along to, this is what we're using. So we have this new math curriculum and we're using the new math curriculum, right? It's not gonna, you know, that really fun lesson that you did before, that might still be incorporated, but not all the time. Maybe that very favorite one, you can still do that one. But we're really trying to move in the path of aligning using the curriculum that we have. And I just forgot to look at a note. The aligning of the curriculum, I think, will be, you know, Beth and I in a conversation have said, kind of looking at 3 to 5 years, right? It's going to take some time to do that. It's not going to be something that we can just, you know, quickly meet together and figure that out. That's going to be a process over time. And it's really important that we continue to focus on it vertically as well as horizontally. And I forgot to add a really good big check mark next to the mental health and anxiety is that we do have a new school psychologist, Jackie Guesnell, at the Russell Street School this year. And that has been, you know, an automatic improvement just to have her on board with us this year. I think that's it. Any questions?
Jen?
Yeah, just a quick question. So we said a few minutes ago about UDL and how it's the teachers don't have to relearn a whole new thing. It's just small tweaks or changes. Could you maybe give one example of that?
Sure.
On the spot? Sorry to put you on the
It's
spot.
okay,
You can
it's
get back
okay.
to us.
I can give an example today. You know, some of the things, you know, we have had students always that benefit from having something at a easier reading level. You know, if you're challenged with reading, you can still get the same science concept necessarily if you're reading it at a level that's appropriate for you. So teachers are really looking for how many different ways can you get this material. If it's fifth grade material, can I find the same material at a lower reading level in maybe simpler terms that will help you to understand it? Can you incorporate a video that goes with that? So now you can see what you're doing. Those types of things. It's little tweaks along the way.
Okay.
But really to kind of offer it up. We were talking about it in the example as instead of instead of making a taco salad and giving it to you, to put all the taco salad pieces in different parts and let you make your own. So to really offer up the pieces and let kids pick and choose what helps
That
them.
makes sense.
And so, and it really makes learning fun and interesting and engaging for kids if they have more than one option for how to do it. So if the teacher says, you can do it like this, or you can do it like this, or you can do it like that, then if I'm really feeling like reading today, I might pick that one, but if I'm not, I can pick something else. And so it makes kids feel like they have, you know, an option to make their own choice. And the end result is they're all learning the same thing. And it offers those opportunities for kids to pick what they feel like doing that day. Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
And if I may,
Sure.
I'm a UDL enthusiast. But we'll be thinking firm goals, flexible needs.
First step,
right?
admitting.
So self-entitled. So firm goals, flexible needs, right? The students need to learn this thing about science. But they don't necessarily have to read an article to get there, right? They can listen to the article being read to them, they can watch the video. So the goal is very firm, but the way that the student gets to that goal is very flexible. And that's the idea of kind of what we're opening our eyes to of, oh, they don't all have to do the same thing. As long as we're all getting to that end goal results together. And so that's the science is a perfect example of kind of how that we look at that.
It's a good life lesson too.
Yeah, it's not unusual to go into the classroom at Russell Street and see a group working at the table, a group sitting on the floor with headphones on, and then, you know, kids over here on their computers doing something, and they're all doing the same topic, but they're doing it in a different way. It's great.
You know,
Really appreciate the challenges, and I don't think about them as complaining, but more as we're thinking about goals and renewing the goals, using like, that's really helpful to use that as like, what should be the goal, right? Thinking about ongoing. So you mentioned lack of schedule flexibility with UA staff. Do you feel like that impacts mostly just flexibility in terms of scheduling, or is it also a quality thing in terms of, should we think about adding UA staff as a goal that the district should consider, not next year, but, you know, within 5 years, adding more UA staff so that we can do better than policy?
So I'll give you an example. The flexibility in our schedule when we were trying to, so we were trying to add, jump in if you want to jump in at all here, but we were trying to figure out with the new math curriculum that it made sense to have a longer block for math. And for 3 classes, we could do it automatically, and for 3 classes, we had to try to finagle that. And it was because we were stuck with band. And I don't mean stuck with band, I mean, we were stuck in a position because of when the band teacher is available to us. If we were able to have band in the afternoon, that would have freed that all up, but we're not, because she has to be at the high school in the afternoon. And so those are the types of things that I'm talking about where, you know, like there's certain things that we can't schedule on the days that our unified arts teacher is at Shaker Lane.
Yeah.
So it just makes the schedule tighter where if we had a full set of UA teachers at our building 5 days a week. We could have things all at different times during the day where it's just a tight schedule.
So there's a tipping point, right? Where it's like, we can work with this. It's like a puzzle you have to solve, but we can work it.
Exactly.
And this is actually detrimental to the learning for children where it's, and so it sounds like we're not at the tipping point.
No,
It's okay.
No, and it's not detrimental to learning.
No.
It makes scheduling very challenging and very tight.
Okay.
You know, and you know, for some things, and we talked about this with rotating schedules at the high school. And, you know, if we have a schedule where, you know, everybody that is getting math in the morning or reading in the morning, that, you know, if you're not a morning person, you're asked to do your academics at that time.
Yeah.
Not this year, but, and not even last year, I think the year before last, 4th grade had, all of their academics in the morning and all of their specials, or excuse me, all of their specials in the morning and all of their academics in the afternoon. And that was a slog, to try to get, to just push, you know, 9-year-olds. And that was because the way the schedule was. So just that flexibility would, you know, would give us more freedom to kind of accommodate those types of things.
Okay.
And the school day is fixed. So most of K-5 education is spent in ELA and math. So if we did hire a band teacher for one school, we don't have the opportunity to take something away.
Sure.
So what we would be creating an inefficiency.
Yep.
We could use that teacher to do something else, but it would be creating prep time where you have to ask yourself on all the things we want to do, is that the best idea for that point in time? There will come a point in time in our district as we continue to grow, for what it's going to be, where we're going to have to add a class to each grade. And then at that time, there will be a natural tendency to acquire your own UA staff. So it's a matter of moving forward and identifying that point in time where we can actually do that. Then at that time, we need to have a discussion about, is that what we want to do, or is this an opportunity to introduce world language? There's so many things to think about when we do reach that point.
It's kind of similar to the question I asked during the MAP presentation in regards to balancing academics and mental health. And then also balancing that with some of the challenges that I see you guys having in the school. So if I look at the MAP data, we already acknowledged that most of the students are achieving at or above their grade level, which is great. And like I said, I don't want to stop challenging teachers and students, but at what point is it detrimental to either the students that aren't achieving or also detrimental to the teachers and your quality of teaching? So, with your challenges, implementing new initiatives for curriculum, that obviously takes time. You have, professional development time that you guys are trying to contribute to that. And then, managing those range of learners. So is there room or is there a need to step back a little bit and see if there's more focus that needs to be shifted, not away from the curriculum, but not so focused on challenging the curriculum more for the students, because they are already achieving where we want them to be and we don't want them to lose that.
I'm glad you said that. So I can give a big check mark for Andrea Romano and the full staff at Russell Street. And I didn't mention this in here. So one of the when Andrea put together scheduling committee in the spring, one of the things we really wanted to do in the past, pre-COVID, we had clubs and activities after school, and that's a little bit of a challenge with not having a late bus and access for everybody. But people were feeling like that kind of fun choice stuff was missing. It is part of WIN, so kids that there is a rotation in WIN where kids get to pick something that's fun. So it's not always like what I need academically. It's there's some fun WIN things built in too. And we really tried to figure out what we could do with the full day Wednesdays versus early release Wednesdays. And so there's very briefly, it was a long process, but very briefly, we gave teachers, and we talked about UDL, we gave teachers an opportunity to tell us what they might like to do. So we have singing in third grade, we have knitting, we have painting, we have Frisbee. There's everybody kind of picked a thing that they want to offer as sort of an elective for kids. And it's a big challenge for Andrea to schedule and put everybody in, and those will rotate during the year. But that's where we really incorporate. The kids are so excited about that. That's something that we're incorporating this year. That's just to kind of build in something that you might not get in the curriculum or in your UA anywhere else. So kids are, will be doing ultimate Frisbee and things like that, and pottery and painting and knitting and all of those things. And so I like that you said, so we're kind of letting kids be kids, right? And do something that will make them feel good, that's enriching for them, that they're excited about, and we're building that into our school day. So we're not, you have to be doing your academic, right? That is, if you want to look at the mental health and the anxiety piece for them, it's something that's kind of built in that they can be excited about.
I think that's great that the kids have that kind of choice time. It's obviously much needed, especially because we are so curriculum focused and we have great, results because of that.
But I definitely want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that their mental health is also a focus, and that also that the teachers aren't so inundated with so much curriculum that it's great that they're allowed to do this too, but that's another, that's another thing on their plate to involve into their curriculum. And I don't want teachers to burn out either. We have to make sure that they have the energy for the kids that especially need their attention.
And I think interestingly, we were really happy and pleasantly surprised when we offered this up because it could go one of two ways, right? Teachers could have been like, are you kidding? Who were they?
Right.
But it was just went out in a Google form and Andrea was texting me saying the Google form is filling up because people were just putting in all kinds of really fun things that they were excited about that they're going to do with kids. So it's yet to start, but it's starting soon. So we're really excited about that. And staff is really excited too.
Yeah. Do you guys do any evaluation for the staff as to like how they're feeling time wise? If they are feeling like spread too thin, or if they have time to focus on the students that need to focus, but they can't?
I think teachers will always find the time for the kids that need help. And I think, I'm not saying this in a negative way, and teachers always feel like they're stretched too thin. We really talk about, and I believe Michelle does too, we really talk about in our staff meetings trying to have balance. If you're still there at 5 o'clock, we're asking you why you're still there at 5 o'clock. And we just said to a new teacher today, you need to be able to go home and be with your family. Like, we can't do this 24 hours a day. We want you to be able to stay with us. So I think that is an important focus at Russell Street where we're really looking at that and kind of having people kind of watch out for each other is really what we talk about in our staff meetings to make sure that people are, if you're struggling, if we can help you, come and let us know. But we really do want to make sure that these things are built in, the win time is built in, the flex walk time is built in, and also this fun time is built in that teachers will feel good about too.
And it is a delicate balance. In terms of curriculum implementation, we've taken a very different approach. I mean, years ago, there'd be a new curriculum and you would put it in front of your staff and have one PD and they'd be responsible for implementing the new curriculum. What we've done is we've extended our PD over a 2-year period. So there's naturally going to be overlap between our curriculum revisions, but the whole intent was to provide the support that they didn't have before to take stress away.
Right.
I think that was a missing part of the conversation. And it results in a far more effective implementation. And it directly impacts learning in the classroom because we spread out that implementation process. I think that's what we're seeing right now. We could have been finished with the reading, but we realized that if we didn't do that, we weren't going to get a full implementation. And math, I always chuckle when they talk about math because we had Eureka math and everyday math. And everyday math was more palatable to certain grades, and Eureka math was better for other grades. So then we ended up with a separation within the same grade. So we were really faced, with a dilemma. They were all doing the right thing, but there was no consistency in terms of vertical alignment. And then we started to struggle with horizontal alignment because we need to be teaching the same technology or the same terminology. So the math revision was a 5-year project. We had to take all of these different programs and then to find a research-based program that would meet most of our needs. It was probably the hardest curriculum implementation in our district to this point in time. It's successful, and we're on a good road.
And I will say Beth did a great job of planning the PD for this year and gave us this beautiful color coded multiple page schedule of that PD. And it, when I passed it out at the staff meeting on the first day of school, people were just going through the pages. But after every professional development time, people stop down and say that it's really good. It's really good. So I hope you're getting that feedback that people say like that was really time well spent doing that. And the model that we've set up too is that people aren't just doing the PD by themselves. So we have teams of teachers set up and theirs, and so they can walk away and have conversation with other groups at their grade level. So it's been really beneficial.
Brad?
Oh,
You say really?
Yeah, just kidding. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. And no, just kidding. My quick questions were, obviously the map data is extremely helpful, but we've talked about its negatives, of course. Do we have to do the January? Like, we didn't get the January data. We just got the spring and the fall. I mean, do we have to do it? Is it part of the contract? Okay, so it looks like we have to do January.
In order to get the full results, we have to do January. Yeah.
Okay,
I also think that January is pretty important too, because typically what we, and I don't want to get back into it, I'm talking about math systems first, but typically we see a pretty high score in the fall, and then the January score goes up, and then the end of the year dips down a little bit, because we've been really rich in content for a long time.
okay.
And so I think even if we were able to get rid of the January one, I don't think it would be wise to do it.
Okay, and then for the unified, along the lines of Vino's question with the unified art staff, I mean, only having unified arts 4 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week. Does that also pose a problem for common planning among the grade levels as well? Because there's always that interruption.
Sure, it doesn't, so like right now in an individual grade level, 3 classes are at a special and 3 classes are doing academics.
Right.
So yes,
So that prevents them from,
from being all together
Yeah.
at the same time. Yep, they figure it out. They lunch together and things
Yeah.
like that. But yes, it doesn't free up a whole team.
okay. So something to think about. I mean, obviously, we can't have both schools start at the same time. We don't have enough buses or enough money. Yes,
There's 6 staff members and 5. You know what I mean? We have to have 6 specialists. We can be an extra way per teacher.
Right.
I mean, it's just the number of staff we have.
We have looked at ways to try to figure it out, and it's, it just is a challenge. And, I think we spent a lot of time chatting about it in the spring of last year, and it just didn't seem viable at this time.
gotcha.
But
And we tried to work with the high school staff too, to figure out with the high school administration to see if there was a way for us to incorporate Hillary at a different time during the day for band, and that didn't work out when their band needs it. So, it's just kind of a mix between the schools.
And it's a challenge, but it allows us to offer more UAs. I mean, there are many schools out there that haven't ventured into what we have, and they have less opportunities for students K-5. So, go trade.
Mhm. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before I start, can I just circle back to Stacey's question? Because when we thought 2021 was a tough year, 21, 22 last year was way tougher. And I remember sitting down with a number of staff members that were crying because they were so stressed. And I remember saying to them, pump the brakes on the curriculum, focus on those kids. We'll get there when we get there. So when Mrs. Steele said, we're rebounding, yeah, we're rebounding. It's going to take a few years. So, and I know Cheryl's done the same, and maybe she didn't think that was last year. We're off in a different start this year, but there were times last year where we're like, nope, just pause. Don't worry about it. Let's just focus on these kids because they are not ready to learn if they are not emotionally and socially with us. So I know that is something that we are working on pre-K-5. Okay. So goals, some of this is repetitive. We are a pre-K to 5 school. So a lot of this is some stuff that Mrs. Temple had. So the first thing we have is we did implement Lucy Hawkins. Again, we implemented it during the 2021 school year. So we had a good run of it last year, and still Mrs. Steele still has professional development for us this year. So that is a goal that we're still working on. The next topic is engaging in professional collaboration to examine and evaluate math curriculum for implementation during this school year. Last year, Mrs. Steele had put together a math selection and development committee, and we met multiple times. Staff members volunteered to be on this. We had staff members from K to 5, extensive meetings, extensive looking at programming, looking at different types of screeners that gives us information on which programs are best suited for our students that match what our needs are. So that all happened last year and staff was heavily involved in that. We narrowed it down to two, just to give you some information. We narrowed it down to 2 programs. We did a mini pilot, but I think it was like 2 weeks for each of the program to get some feedback. And then we picked one program. So the staff was, you know, you never come to a unanimous decision, but the staff did weigh heavily into the math program. That's what we picked. Noticing there's a typo in the next one. Sorry about that. Administer Ames Web plus early literacy screening and reading assessments in the Schcmte dyslexia screener. So we did start that last year. Our profession, we started it a little bit, not later, but our screening was a little later because we needed the professional development for our staff. And so we are ready. It's already in process right now. I think we finish up assessments next Tuesday. And I was recently looking at some literature from DESE that said that they are changing the wording to early literacy screening and not specifically dyslexia screener, because they're just encapsulating any child who's having any early literacy challenges. So we're continuing with that. Lexia programming last year, we had bought Lexia accounts. Lexia is a reading program. It's an adaptive reading program that meets students where they are reading. There's phonics skills, there's reading, there's it'll come back to me. We bought the program for all of kindergarten students, all of our transitional students, and we targeted students in 1 and 2. Some phonics, sorry, there's some phonics in there as well. Last year, our goal was to implement the Hegarty Phonemic Awareness program in grades K and 1. We also reviewed reading and math progress through data meetings to identify student needs of remediation and differentiation. And then the last one, I'm going to talk a little bit more about diversified reading intervention. So when someone had asked the question, you know, what are we doing? How are we changing that? We saw this last year. And so we made it a goal in our school improvement plan. Like what we know is on my school advisory council. And we said, all right, we need to look at different ways. When I came to Shaker Lane back in 2017, we had brought in a program called Level Literacy Intervention. And what we found over time was it's not a one size fits all model. And this intervention was very comprehension based. Well, our kids aren't decoding. Our kids don't know their letters. They don't know their sounds. So getting to the comprehension is way off in the sunset. We're not there. So we started to look at a lot of interventions from the Florida Center of Reading Research. So there's activities, multi-sensory approaches through them. For phonemic awareness, our special education teachers are using a book it's called Equipped for Reading Success, a comprehensive step-by-step program for developing phonemic awareness and fluent word recognition. They're working on word change. So for example, like box, we change the beginning sound, turn it into fox, then change the end phoneme to fog, and then change it to dog, and then change one phoneme. We also do mix it and fix it words. So finding a word, making it, mixing it up, fixing it again. So what they have done, they've also brought in some other things from years past, reading recovery ideas, reading for success. There's been so many models. So I think what we had done, I know what we have done in the past 2 years is what do we need to do that's different, a different type of foundations. For example, we have a student this year who is brand new to us, from another country and only speaks Spanish. So we are making an alphabet book for this student. We are going letter sound, letter ID for the student. So it's really looking at what do our students need as opposed to the program that we had back in 2017. So hopefully that answers that question. On the next slide. So the accomplishments is that, yes, we are 2 years into Lucy Calkins, but the continuation of the PD. We selected our Into Math program. We are first. Waggle is our technology program that the students will be using. We had our first PD on that yesterday. We have other PDs coming with Into Math. The early literacy and dyslexia screener. So we are in the midst of administering that, but prior to that, at the end of last year, our reading interventionist came to me and said, Michelle, I don't want to wait for some of these kids that I know are going to have the summer slide and are going to come in needing some support. So I want to pick up those kids right away. We started servicing kids on the first full week of school, which I was so excited because we took the data from the end of the year and said, where did they fall? who are these kids we're picking up. We reached out to parents on that Thursday or Friday, and we started servicing those kids. So we're not waiting for that screening information. And I credit the reading interventionist, Sarah Kobe and Bex Mon, for coming to me and saying, hey, let's get going. Let's not wait for that screener to pick up those kids. We decided as staff, much to the chagrin of my budget, that we were purchasing Lexia for all K-1 students and grade 2 students. This is going to be very well monitored because this program is very expensive. While the teachers love it, I just want to make sure it's being used. So we had a leadership meeting last year, and we're going to be checking in at the end of every month. How long have the kids been on? What data do we have? Because to spend, it was like $10,000 for this program. It is great. It is wonderful, but are we using all of it? The cost, benefit of it is once you get to having so many accounts, it's cheaper to buy a whole school membership than, 170 licenses. So that's the reason we went there. But when I look at my budget right now, I just want to make sure we're using it appropriately. The next thing we have is the Phonemic Awareness program by Hegarty, which is great in K-1. We're discussing bringing it into 2. I'd like to see, we have seen some great progress when we're having our student success team meetings of students being able to rhyme, onset, change sounds. So that's good. And then review of reading performance to target instruction. So again, just looking at the reading, what else do we need to target for interventions? Challenges, some of them are very similar to Principal Temple's. Common planning time for our pre-K to 5 staff. We have a good foundation on foundations. So I feel like our challenges right now are into math and Lucy Calkins. How do you fit everything in? The time spent on assessments. We recently, I was talking with Mrs. Steele, and what can we give up? And we decided to give up something that when I came on board, if we had purchased the program, so I had to implement it. It's called the Benchmark Assessment System by Qantas and Fennell. It isn't a research-based program. It doesn't have nationally normed data. So that is an option that I said to the teachers, take it off your plate and let's focus on the Ames Web screener. Let's focus on math in 2nd grade. You want to give that for more data and more information, it's completely up to you, but that is one piece that, we decided to take away from the teachers this year. Managing the range of learners. The next 2 are the big ones, the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our student. We hired last year a school adjustment counselor to replace our school counselor. Not just that word, school adjustment counselor comes with so much more wealth of knowledge and support for these kids. And, I need to give props to Ms. Diatko because she is fantastic with these students, her skill set, her ability to bring some ideas and strategies. And, she blows my mind with the stuff she does. We also brought on an incredibly talented BCBA, Katie Sapp, who has been dedicating a lot of her time in our PACE preschool program with our students who have a higher need of support. I think without those 2 people, I don't know where I would be. So I'm so grateful for them. But even though we're moving forward, I still see the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students the top priority. They come in, dysregulated, and it's a matter of hours to get them regulated and back on so that they can learn. And, the learning is, to me, the last thing. I need them here. I need them ready to learn. I need them happy and not crying and not upset and not hungry and not, this happened at home. So there's still a lot going on there. And then, of course, that 4-letter word, time. We're always vying for time. Everybody's vying for time. If someone figures out the answer, let me know. But that's always something that comes up. So revisions and goals. So like I said, we're increasing the use of Lexia for this year. I'm looking forward to working with our math interventionist Beth more. I have reading meetings with our reading interventionists, but we have not, and Beth does an amazing job. Miss Moore does an amazing job looking at the math data, but I'd love to sit down with her and have those meetings just to be more part of the process. So that is the goal of ours. Providing into math and reflecting on this year so that next year we can see what needs to be changed. One of the big conversations when we did the math PD was that there is no program that has everything. So this year is a chance for us to teach it with fidelity. And then at the end of the year, reflect what are pieces that we need to supplement and add to it. So that's really a goal of this year's school improvement plan. The continuation of the UDL model and developing additional strategies to support social emotional needs of students. Our school psychologist, Danya Sklar, I also need to give her a little shout out because she also, is amazing with group work and supporting kids. So I think the three of them, we're continuing to work on that. Something that came up yesterday that I was excited to be put about when Mrs. Steele said, can you go to this PD instead of the math? I'm like, yeah, I'll really want to go math. It was the early adopters adaptive XPD that focused on cultural awareness, and myself and 3 staff members with my staff and some other staff pre-K at 12 went. And out of that PD, first of all, the presenter was amazing. And what we are going to focus on now is getting a pulse from our families. What is the culture that you want to see at Shaker Lane? And when we think about cultural proficiency, this presenter said, you need to think about not just culture as heritage culture, but the culture of the building. And what do parents want? What do you offer? What do they want? So we are going to be working together to create a survey for parents to gather this information and then incorporate that into the whole year. And also one other thing, at the start of the year, before school started, Ms. Deacon and I were working with the staff to create our own, I don't like the word mission and vision, because I think it gets too fancy and scares people. But what is our goal as a staff? What do we want to focus on? Do we want to focus on happiness? Do we want to focus on scores? Do we want to focus on social emotional health? So we're finishing that up, hopefully, excuse me, on Tuesday. We had grouped staff members by table before the school year started across grades. So we had pre-K, art, first grade, second grade, so that they weren't all with their second grade team, or first grade team, or kindergarten team, or pre-K team. And we had them write down everything that was important to them. And then we asked them to try and turn it into one goal for your group. Excuse me. We're going to finish that on Tuesday, and then the leadership team is going to take the 6 different goals and then create one goal for our school that is meaningful to us at Shaker Lane. So that's the other piece. I'm just going to grab a drink of water. Never talk this much. Usually I'm listening to the kids. So I think that's another goal that I forgot to add up there. So
Great. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Questions from the committee, Vino?
Yeah, I have a question, pure curiosity, no hidden agenda, but I don't know the answer. How much time do students spend on technology in the classroom?
if I had to guess, I know they do a lot of centers in reading and math. They're about 10 to 15 minutes. So if they 10 to 20 minutes at those times. So those are the times that I can say 100%.
Yeah.
There may be some other kids, if they're on Lexia, they may do an additional 10 minutes.
Okay.
So those are the times that I can speak to confidently, but I can certainly let you know. Yeah, get a pulse for the other ones, but I know center rotations, dream box is often one. Excuse me, now probably will be waggle. And then the other one would be Lexia in a rotation. Sometimes. Excuse me, they do have, there's the program I'm thinking of in first grade. No. It'll come to me, it's on the iPad, and they can do some manipulation of word sounds and send it to the teacher in this program that we have.
Dreambox?
It'll come to me. Sorry. It'll come to me.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking not more than a half hour, but I can't say confident.
Can I piggyback on that? Do you guys have like a set limit that you try to set for the kids? Or is there any communication between?
Time on technology?
Yeah.
I would say probably the least amount of time would be in kindergarten, because they are teaching them how to write, how to hold a pencil, paper to pencil. As opposed to when we were in remote learning, it's really hard for that. So I know that, we do a lot of copies, we do a lot of coloring, we do a lot of pencil paper stuff. So the least amount in kindergarten, I think the most amount would be in second grade. Yeah. But I haven't set a time, I can certainly talk to the teachers and look at that.
Yeah, I would be full disclosure,
Yeah.
total agenda, because we don't like to do too many
Yeah.
screens, but so my first grader was coming home and she's like,
can't do my TV time, I already have my screen time, but I don't know I don't know if she's exaggerating how much time. I assume she hasn't done her hour and a half max. So that's why I'm just curious if you guys are monitoring that at all, because if Lexi is great, Box is great, you want to get your investment, you absolutely want them on it. But I'm curious as to if there's going to be any, just monitoring of how much the kids.
Well, like I said, I would know the center rotations for math and reading are usually 10 to 12 minutes. 15 would be max. So that is your 10 minutes to 20 minutes. And then if other kids are doing Lexia, in addition to that, yeah, maybe another 15.
And we don't want to be too prescriptive. We value autonomy. And it really depends on what they're teaching. I mean, I can't see consistency from day to day. But all of our staff are really cognizant of the fact to balance. We don't want a technology-driven school. Many of our schools where they're using it all day long. That was never our intent.
But to go to an earlier point, in the UDL model, they may have choices where they learn this concept, that concept through a screen instead of this card game or something else. So it's probably not consistent even for same students in the same class.
Next question is thank you, Kelly. So you had talked about kind of the benefits of having the school adjustment counselor and how much of a benefit it's been for the school. Do we have a school adjustment counselor in all the schools? Is that something we're working towards?
We do share a bit at Russell Street, but every other school has an adjustment counselor.
They do have one.
Yes.
So Russell Street shares with Streeter Lane, is that? Or they,
Well,
they're just not there full time.
we have, I'm gonna have Lynn speak to this, but we've developed a model in our district of our clinical staff go where they're needed as well. They have a home-based school. They spend most of their time there, but if there's a need at any other school that isn't being met, they help out with that. So that's the approach we use in our district. It's just a matter of when we do have an opening, Russell Street, when we do have an opening, we would most likely look at an adjustment count.
It comes down, so we have school counselors at all the schools. At Shaker Lane, we have a full-time BCBA, we have a school adjustment counselor and a school psychologist. At Russell Street, we have a school psychologist, a school counselor, which is just a different licensure and background and trainings with a school counselor at Russell Street. And then our second full-time BCBA does cover Russell Street, the middle school and high school, because the caseload is less dense. And then at the middle school, we do have a school counselor who is a licensed social worker. And then we also have a school psychologist at the middle school. And then at the high school, we have an adjustment counselor, a school psychologist, and 2 guidance counselors.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
We're well staffed.
We do.
Not all
So
staff,
the
well.
counselor has a specific skill set you thought was really imperative to the school. So if you guys feel like that you have those bases covered across all schools, that's what I was just curious. That's a great response to have.
Right.
Yeah, I just appreciate these presentations. And again, I know the committee has asked the superintendent y'all to be explicit about the challenges and just to say how much we appreciate that. It really helps us get a sense of what's going on. One thing I'd just say as a comment, not even a question, is I'm so glad you said that you and your staff did attend and are still paying attention to kind of culturally responsive teaching. That's something that's been a focus for the district for a while. I see, and we're implementing all these different curricula. And I'm glad that it's still a focus. It's still something we're thinking about.
Good. I think Principal Temple got the majority of our questions, and we assume that a lot of it carries down. So thank you very much. Okay. This will be I'll take a brief pause here, second opportunity for interested citizens, and no one came in person. We'll pause for a quick second just to see if we have any hands raised at home. And it looks like we do. So is Bettina bringing that person in there?
This television.
Okay. Let's see. Looks like she's on. So Ms. Bloomstein?
Hi there. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
If you
super.
could just give your name and your address and your comment, please.
Sure. My name is Margot Bloomstein, and I live at 7 Wilson Lane. My daughter is at Shaker Lane. We're new to the school district this year. I had sent everyone in the school committee an email several days ago, but wanted to kind of chime in tonight, bring my concerns to the committee, as well as kind of provide a little bit of an update on that. So when I I guess before I get into that, as we heard in Mrs. Steele's presentation, students suffered last year in areas like literary textual analysis because they missed in-class learning. And I am a big fan of in-class learning time and want to ensure that our schools are communicating with students and parents so as to maximize that time. When I emailed the committee several days ago, it was after COVID finally came to our house. We went 2.5 years without it, and then 10 days into the school year, boom. And I realized during that time, as we were kind of like picking up the pieces and figuring out, okay, what do we do? And all at this point, how do we get everybody better? I realized that some of the school's communication wasn't in line with DESE and Mass Department of Public Health guidance. And it seemed like that kind of gap could compromise both local public health as well as parents' ability to make good decisions on behalf of their kids. So the DESE and Department of Public Health guidelines say that after an exposure, people should mask for 10 days and test around day 6. And Justin, I think you and I had emailed back and forth a little bit about this, but specifically on their exposure guidance for children and staff and childcare, K through 12, out of school time, and rec camp program settings, they say those who can mask should do so until day 10 after a known exposure, and it is recommended that they test on day 6 of exposure. So that's specific to school populations. So the net is that students and staff are supposed to mask after an exposure. In order for that to happen, though, we need to tell them and their parents that there's been an exposure. And right now, that isn't happening. I think in part out of an interest in maybe maintaining confidentiality and whatnot, but also because we've moved away from contact tracing. Stacy, I think you had said, I think it might have been in like a public Facebook post or something a few months ago, that as we learn from COVID, let's hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And I think there is middle ground between what we're doing now and the older days of contact tracing that is around communicating in a way that is assertive, specific, and actionable to avoid the worst. I think right now, it seems like the policy, at least from what I've seen so far in Shaker Lane, is in like the weekly emails that we get from Principal Kane and Nurse Philpott to remind everybody, like, hey, let's practice good public health policy. Let's wash our hands. If you're feeling sick, if you have cold-like symptoms, take a test at home, stay home, that sort of thing. But we don't have any sort of acute response that says, this week in your child's class, someone tested positive. So when COVID came to our house after our daughter tested positive, and I reached out to the school nurse, reached out to her teacher, I said, we still mask indoors. She consistently wears a mask except for in the cafeteria and at snack time. I said, here's what's happened. The nurse said, okay, stay home until this day, test at this time and all, then she can come back. But there was no other outreach to the other parents. So I had to contact them and at least I contacted the kids that she sits with kind of at her table, the kids that she sits closest to, the kids that I know that she sits with them on the school bus. I was able to reach out to parents as appropriate to say, hey, your kid has been exposed. You might want to test them and all that. I didn't think to remind them that you have to mask too. But I was willing to kind of trade that privacy for the communication because it was kind of a necessary part of public health. And that's something that I'd like to see coming from the school district. So the update, though, is that since I sent that email last night, after emailing with the Board of Health and then joining in with their meeting, discussed that with them. We discussed the gap between what our schools are doing and the DESE Department of Public Health policy. as you can imagine, they want to make sure that we're in compliance, acknowledging that, yeah, we're not doing contact tracing this year, but that still gives us a lot of freedom to alert parents in acute response to exposure in the classroom so that it doesn't violate the privacy of individual students, but does arm parents with immediate specific information to respond appropriately when there's been a positive case in the classroom. And I think it's fair to say, at least in a first grade classroom, with the way students move around and all, that if there's a case, pretty much every kid in that classroom has been exposed. And I think right now, like the sort of more generic guidance that we're getting is good, but the onus is still on the individual then to reach out to say, this just happened, here's the action that we do need to take. And frankly, I think when you want to just focus on taking care of your child, starting to make calls to all the other parents in the class isn't something that a parent should have to do.
Got it. Margaret, thanks very much for the call. We did exchange emails back and forth, and I will state that Littleton Public Schools is following DESE guidance. They don't recommend universal masking. They don't recommend contact tracing. They don't recommend testing asymptomatic students. So we are doing exactly what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is recommending. There is a difference between keeping kids in school without a mask and their ability to learn, who are, at a safe population than those that might be at risk that are older in the general public. And DESE has recognized that, they've implemented that, and that's what we're following. So I'll leave it at that. Not seeing any other folks. Brad, did you have a comment?
Yeah, what Margot's saying makes some sense, though. The idea that if the guidelines from, I don't have them in front of me, that if you've been exposed, you should mask. And if we know exposures are in schools, without doing contact tracing, I don't know what our capacity is. I don't know what our will is. But it seems like we should at least think about what else we can do, either in terms of, when we met with the Board of Health, we talked about, what data the district has, what we know about cases, which I assume are all self-reported at this point to us.
Yes. Yes, they are.
I don't know. I think we should think about this and see if we are doing what we need to do.
I just have a question, not necessarily a comment, unless we're going down that road, but because we're not isolating, wasn't the word, we were cohorting last year, where you could isolate who you're exposed to within a group of students. My understanding is that there's no cohorting at this point in terms of like recess, everyone plays with everybody. And so I'm just curious how beneficial classroom positive data would even be in terms of exposure, because I think you're exposed to everybody in the school almost at this point. It's really just a question. Is that actually beneficial?
Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, in Margot's specific example with the first grade classroom, she goes on to say that essentially maybe everyone should be in a mask at that point in time because there may have been exposure. And DESE's come out and said, they don't recommend universal masking. So I get that it's contradictory, but we're doing the best we can. And to get back to, Michelle's comment earlier about, cost benefit, like at what point do we put everyone in a mask again? And at what point do we just get back to normal? And if you want a mask, you're supported to mask. And if you don't want a mask, you don't.
Well, I think even from a parent perspective, if you see that there's a child that's positive in your classroom, sure, you can take that step. And maybe there's no children positive in your child's classroom, but someone positive in another classroom, and then your child becomes positive, but you didn't get data from that other classroom. You know what I mean? So if we're not keeping them isolated in their classrooms, like you could do grade level data, maybe, but then that's just like, there's always a positive, I think.
Yeah.
I just think that's where we're living. And so I'm just questioning, like, I'm not against sharing data that might benefit parents, but this is now very complicated because what's the data that's actually beneficial?
Right. And,
And we don't get all the data anyway,
right,
partially.
So we do have some data. And
Partial
if
data.
and if this parent is saying, my child who masked almost all the time ends up with COVID, again, not even clear, got it, I don't know the situation, got it at the school or not, but was in a room with other kids. We do know that's true. We don't know about playgrounds. We don't know about cafeteria, but there's certain things we know. And I would be in favor of sharing data. I don't know what that means in terms of, recommended versus, just having parents know is better than having parents not know.
I don't see that it necessarily, I mean, I agree with you, it's really hard to trace, and it's recommended that we're not even tracing in the schools anyway. I would think the only thing that we could do is if there's a positive case in the classroom, you just email the parents in that classroom, and then it's up to parents to decide what to do, with the stipulation that they could have been exposed at recess, or they could have been exposed to the bus stop, and we don't know if it's from this class, but we're just letting you know right now that they were in a classroom or.
I mean, are we going to
Day.
do that for the flu? Are we going to do that for other
Right,
respiratory?
that's.
We never did that in the past.
unravels.
Yeah, we never did that in the past.
Yeah.
And we had communication overload last year with letters. We had the discussion in the spring where, we're sending letters out every day, and families with more than one sibling had multiple letters every day. It kind of lost its effectiveness after a period of time.
Well, and I think there's also the argument of masking to prevent that, but we've seen cases where students are masking still. And so it's like, where are you getting it from? If there's a student masking in the classroom that still ends up being positive, there's just so many sources of exposure.
And asymptomatic individuals as well.
Right.
Okay. No other hands raised, so we will move on to subcommittee reports. PMBC,
Don't have anything to report.
that's part of it.
I don't think that there's in the room.
No, not really. I met with PMBC, I don't know, last night, and just gave them an update on, where we are with the Schcmte Lane superintendent's gonna go over.
Yeah.
And the high school roof project is still on track. We're gonna go out to bid, in the spring. And, finally get the high school, the partial roof done over the admin area, not the entire roof, but the partial roof. So that's still on track, but that's it.
Great. Budget subcommittee, Jen, myself, Superintendent Clenchey and Steve Mark had a meeting this afternoon. Right on the heels of what you guys were just speaking about. So at this point in time, the business office has identified a number of capital projects for a 2024 budgetary cycle. We will continue to discuss this list just for everyone's sort of education. There's items on here like rooftop replacements for the high school, the first floor of the high school, the entire high school roof, which would translate to a big number. Fixing the fields at fixing the lighting at Alumni Field, some furniture replacements, some sidewalk repairs, some stuff. So the bottom line here is it's not all stuff that needs to be done next year. It's just stuff that we need to be thinking about that's going to eventually come to end of life. And we want to not necessarily get out of trouble, but stay out of trouble with some of these projects. So I want to thank Steve for putting that list together, and we'll continue to fine tune it as we go along. Yep. Good?
Yep.
Okay. The Shaker Lane
Project.
Yeah, the Shaker Lane
Sure.
project update.
I mean, I put this on the agenda because some of you are probably wondering, are we doing anything? And we
Tell us.
are. We've submitted 12 reports to MSBA since August. So internally, we're really busy. I would like, however, Steve, if you could contact whoever the PMBC reps are for the building committee. They really need to initiate the building committee meeting. It's not under the superintendent at this point in time. they take the reign and our eligibility period is over March 23rd, 23, and we're in October. It'd be nice to sit down, get together, and have that conversation. We need to be looking for potential architects for the feasibility study, et cetera. And I think it would create comfort that perhaps is lacking right now, getting together and having that conversation.
Right, so that was part of the conversation I had with MSBA. The fact that because they were asking about, should we be going out for an OPM at this point in time? I actually called MSBA and talked to our rep, and she said, no, don't go out to bid at this point in time for an OPM. We have to finish the phase 1 portion that we're in, the eligibility period. Once we submit all those and MSBA reviews all those documents and accepts them, then they will invite us into the feasibility study. We'll have to attend a MSBA board meeting. And that's
Right.
when we move into the next phase and start looking at OPMs and feasibility study. So that's the process. But I'm more than glad to work her and set up a meeting with the building committee, just so we can all discuss and meet.
I mean, that's very helpful because it's going to take a while to find an OPM. And if MSBA is telling you that we really don't have much to do until they analyze the forums and admit us into the second phase of the project, then we need to respect that. That takes a little bit of pressure off my mind, because having done this before, that you don't snap your fingers and have an OPM overnight. So there's a lot of work that's involved in this.
Correct, and MSBA has sample OPM letters, and they certainly have OPM firms that MSBA has approved. So you get to select from, and I don't know the number that MSBA has, you get to select from the 5 that they've approved.
Okay.
It is kind of how that process works.
Stacy, what are your thoughts? Well, should we have a meeting for the
Well, I know we
Sake
have
of having a
a
meeting.
building committee.
the building committee?
So that's what you're looking to
Yes.
coordinate. I think that would be a great idea just for us to get together and initiate something to start. I've been kind of waiting for an invite in the past if I've missed something. So I mean, I don't think it would hurt for us all to get together and understand what the process is, what we need to start looking at.
We can certainly.
I can coordinate that with Anthony and the town administrator and Steve Moore, the chairman of the PMBC. I certainly start making those arrangements.
Good. At least share all the documents we submitted.
Absolutely.
To start.
So you had included a timeline in our packet, the educational profile questionnaire and the online enrollment projection. Looks like it was due today. Those are
Yep,
brand.
we're golden. We're
Good. So
golden.
the next thing's December 28th. Yeah. So December 28th is the next required submission. So
Correct, and just also to note, one of the items is that local vote authorization. That's really to secure funding for feasibility study. We've already done that.
okay.
That funding has already been secured.
Yeah, last time meeting. Perfect. Okay, great. Policy subcommittee did a lot of heavy lifting last meeting. Anything to report this meeting?
We've not met in the last 2 weeks.
School start time update committee.
We have an update.
Great.
We met with GPI this afternoon. They shared, the report will be done in a few weeks. They're in a good place in terms of the process, and we feel really confident sort of seeing where they are. They vetted over 20 different options and have narrowed it down to 3 viable options, which we sort of went back and forth today. Asked some probing questions. Could you think about this way? What if we did this? Gave them some gauge on certain things. They really took all of the criteria that subcommittee developed. They said, well, the reason we did this one is because you said this, and the athletics, this, and they took all the pieces. We could really tell. And so now they're going to take those 3 options and really distill it down to, for example, there's one of the options where, you could do this scenario with 8 buses or 9 buses, I can't remember. And then if we added 1 more bus, it shifts the time by this much. There's so many caveats to even these 3 scenarios. So they're really distilling it down. There's also a lot of data points, including ride time and how just shifting, adding one bus, like reduces the ride time from 45 minutes to 20 minutes. Data points that we think would be really helpful for this committee and for the families and the staff to hear about. So we feel really good that we've seen sort of the three scenarios, why they got to where they are, how they really took our feedback and criteria into consideration developing those. And now they're really going to boil those down deeper with data points. In the meantime, we're going to work on the survey that's going to go out. And so hopefully, simultaneous timing, when their report is done, we can then plug in those three scenarios into the survey. Our tentative timeline right now is the report is expected in mid-October, to have the survey out around mid to end of October. Perhaps have a community forum November 10th. We don't have a school committee meeting. Present to the school committee November 17th with the community forum information, the report and the survey results, and then potentially a vote December 1st.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yep.
CPAC update?
One thing about that, I love the timeline. I love we're so explicit about it. Whenever it's formalized, as soon as we can share that with the community and let them know ways they can be involved, I think that's will really help.
The
So,
timeline.
the
Share
timeline.
Timeline.
The
What do you
timeline.
think is the right forum in which to share it or
I think
format?
I think just all of us publicizing it, maybe a letter from the
Send a letter.
superintendent or something like that, saying this is, we're having a community-wide discussion about school start times. This is what we've done. I think maybe
Well, could
this
we
is
do
a
that?
mailing from us or something where this is a big decision for our town. We've talked
Yeah.
about it for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
I think making sure people know that we're working on it and that, and there are chances to be involved at certain inflection points would be.
Yeah. Maybe giving them a heads up on the survey, not
Yes.
just sending it out and saying give a week to.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of context to put into the survey, because if I just got a survey with these three, I'd be like, why did you land on these three? This one looks ridiculous, like who even, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's important to give that context and why we arrived, maybe not list all the criteria, but there was a lot put into consideration in all different aspects.
Yeah.
I will say this, no scenario is perfect. There was a perfect scenario we would have done 10 years ago. Every single one has pros and cons. And so there's not one that stands out. So we were thinking of, that context. We could do it with the survey or a little before the survey so they know, and that might be a good time to outline the timeline.
I just think it's as clear a process we're going to have.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people won't like whatever decision we make, but as long as we follow a clear process, I think that will help ease minds. So.
I think it is gonna make such a big impact. Like you said, not everyone's gonna love it. It's important not to let it get lost in the long emails that us as parents get, because a lot of things get lost there. Because there's a lot going on in the schools, but this is one that's gonna have a really big impact on people. And if they want to have input or want to have some feedback, I would hate for it to get just kind of buried in a lot of other things that maybe not, they're still important, but maybe not be as impactful on.
Well, the fact that it's going to take place with a lot of different public conversations over a 6-8 week period, I think will give people chances to come on board as it moves along. So.
We could send a robocall too.
We could,
So the what, Robo?
we could do a
Automated
PSA.
call.
You're up to that.
It's a PSA.
Public service.
Yeah, but what format do you mean?
What's that?
In what way? How?
Relative, LCTV?
Oh, on TV?
We have a green screen?
Whoa.
I was thinking
Does that sell you?
Facebook.
Yeah, put it on cable if you need any, all call. to all
Like
parents.
playing around in town with a banner. We good?
So that wasn't officially the CPAC.
Now, do you have anything else?
I do have three things in the CPAC. They had, by all accounts, a very successful meeting last week. I couldn't attend, as I told the committee last time, because I had to teach. But a good meeting. There will be a parent meetup, which is not a business meeting. It's just a parent chance for parents to chat with each other about their experiences and about just to be in the room with people who get it. That will be on October 11th. And then also the community should know that we set up a series of kind of meetings between the president and the leader of CPAC, Director Snow, and the school committee rep. Our first meeting of those meetings will be on the 17th. It seems at 1 o'clock. So we're doing stuff. Great.
Yeah.
We're also doing, They also have the basic rights, understanding the IEP workshop coming up on October 18th, and that's presented by the Federation for Children with Special Needs. And they also have put together a collection of books. October is Awareness Month for ADHD, dyslexia, and learning disabilities. And CPAC has put together a collection of books on those topics at the new library.
Terrific. Thank you. And we had an invitation, the budget subcommittee had an invitation out to CPAC. So Steve, at our next budget subcommittee meeting, would you be sure to just invite Brad? You won't attend, but you'll pass the information along to the CPAC folks.
I will not attend, but I will pass it on again.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
We had agreed that the next one, we would spend some time talking about the special ed budget with them. Okay. I think that wraps up all subcommittee reports. I'll announce that our next scheduled school committee meeting is October 13th. Same time, same place, 7 o'clock. We're going to hear an updated enrollment data from the superintendent, strategic plan on the middle school and the high school. Tough acts to follow today. And I think the community's ready for an update on the school safety plans as well. So we know for sure that we'll have at least an officer or the resource officer in attendance. Unfortunately, the chief is away at professional development.
So is the deputy.
Yeah, so is the deputy chief, but we will have a presentation from Littleton Police. So at this point in time,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
a motion to adjourn by Mr. Austin, seconded by Ms. Gold. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. No need for executive session this evening. We are closed.
The program speeds up.